and stripped of all of their possessions. If you were declared a heretic in the Middle Ages, all of your possessions were taken away from you. You were dispossessed, and you would do well if you escaped from being put to death. They were afflicted, verse 37 says, and that word means that they were squeezed. Life was made very narrow for them. And concerning these saints, the world said about them as it did about the Apostle Paul in Acts 22, verse 22. Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. So they were tortured, mistreated, they were cast out of human society, and thirdly, they were killed, and that in the most horrible of ways. Some died at the sword, literally died by means of the murder of the sword. And they had probably the easiest of all deaths. It was most likely quick and relatively painless to be beheaded with the sword, although probably it was after a lot of torture. John the Baptist, for example, was beheaded in prison at the order of Herod. The Apostle James was beheaded by a different Herod in Acts chapter 12. And for others, the ungodly devised cruel and horrible deaths. We have the example of stoning, throwing huge rocks at someone which bounced off of them until finally they died, or being sawn asunder, cut in two with a saw. Tradition says that that's how the prophet Isaiah died, at the hands of King Manasseh himself. And these sufferings of God's saints were intensified by several factors. They were tortured, they were cast out of society, and they were put to death. First of all, their sufferings were shameful or degrading. It's one thing to die as a hero, with the applause of men, with the approval of men. For example, one who dies on the battlefield, dying a hero, gets a medal perhaps posthumously. But these saints were treated as filth, as scum. And what crime had they committed that made them worthy of bonds, of chains, of imprisonment, of torture and death? What terrible iniquity had they done that caused them to be stoned to death, which, remember, was the method of execution used by the Jews for the most wicked of transgressors against God's law? And the answer is, they believed in the true God and in the promise of a Saviour. That was their crime. And add to that the shame of mocking and derision. Others had trial of cruel mockings. Verse 36. Unlikely that as they were laid out to be put to death, there were people cheering them on. More likely there was a crowd of angry and bloodthirsty men crying for their death. Think of the saints in Rome who were led out to be killed by the lions or the gladiators. And all around them is a huge amphitheater filled with bloodthirsty Romans screaming and applauding that they should be put to death. And as they were tortured, God's saints heard the mockings of the enemy. Where's your God now? When is he going to come to rescue you from me? Is he worth it? And that mocking, of course, simply intensified their sufferings. And with all of that came dreadful temptations. They were tempted, we read. And these temptations seemed almost irresistible. irresistible. They were offered, we are told, deliverance. Verse 25, not accepting deliverance. Oh, there was a way of deliverance. You want to escape the torture chamber. You want to get out of this horrible dungeon. You want to escape death. Simply deny your God and we will let you go. That's a stark choice, beloved, that God's saints had to make. Deny Christ and there's freedom for you. Confess Him and there's torture. And perhaps the torture will get worse. And there's fire, and there's sword, and there's other kinds of death being prepared for you. They were offered deliverance. Literally, they were offered redemption. And redemption, remember, is to release someone at a price. We are redeemed by the price of the blood of the Son of God. These people could have been redeemed at a different price, and that price was apostasy. All you have to do is apostatize, and then you will have a kind of a resurrection. They might obtain a better resurrection. They're offered a resurrection. They will be resurrected back to their previous life, just like in verse 35a. They received their dead raised to life again. Literally, that is, they received their dead through resurrection. And they were offered rewards, rich rewards, if they would deny the Lord. In the Middle Ages, it was not uncommon for Protestants to be offered a bishopric if they were to deny the Reformed faith. Accept the Church of Rome and we will make you a bishop. And of course, it's much better for Rome to get a Protestant to recant, that is, to kill that Protestant. Much better for them. Or in the Old Testament, we'll offer you a high-ranking government position if you deny your God. And that's very tempting too, especially if the only alternative is torture and death. And why not accept such an offer? Surely only a fool would deny such an offer. And if that doesn't work, there's emotional blackmail. Family and friends become involved. You get their family members to come and visit them and to try and convince them to recant. And if their family are Christians as well, or believers in the true God as well, then what you do is you bring their family members and you torture their family members in front of the victim. And you put those family members to death in front of the victim and say, either you recant or I'll kill your parents, or I'll kill your wife, or I'll kill your children. Do you want to watch them die before your very eyes? That's what happened to the saints of God. But we are told, through faith, they did not accept that deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And with all those temptations which the ungodly brought to the people of God, there were the temptations and suggestions of the devil himself. Oh, he planted doubts in their minds when they were in their prison cells. God does not really love you, or he would deliver you from this terrible suffering. Surely God is not worth this pain and this suffering. Deny him and curse him. It's for your own good. And only one with very strong faith, beloved, held up by grace, very strong grace, could resist such a temptation. These dreadful sufferings occurred through faith. Remember what faith is. We have said this again and again. Faith is a living bond with Jesus Christ, so that the saint lives out of Jesus Christ, and the life of Jesus Christ is seen in the believer. And what happens when a faithful believer displays the life of Jesus Christ in the midst of a world of darkness? When the light of the righteousness and holiness of Christ is seen in the life of a believer, hatred, antagonism, that's going to be the reaction of the ungodly world. That, after all, is what the ungodly world said about Jesus Christ. He came as the light of the world, and the darkness hated the light. And Jesus said, they hated me, they will also hate you. And behind the world's hatred is the hatred of the devil himself. And throughout the Old Testament scriptures, it was Satan's aim to destroy the people of God, and in that way to prevent the coming of Jesus Christ, the seed of the woman who was going to crush his head. But the devil failed. Time and time he tried, and time he failed. And now Jesus Christ has come. And he has been victorious in dying upon the cross. He has crushed Satan's head. In rising from the dead, he crushed Satan's head. And now he's at the right hand of God the Father, and the devil has not been able to reach him and to destroy him. But does the devil admit defeat? No. He's a fool, but no. He turns his fury upon the saints of Christ, those who continue to confess the name of Christ in the earth. They are the ones upon whom the devil pours out his fury. And God has a purpose in the suffering of his saints. The wicked must fill up the cup of their iniquity and become ripe for judgment. And nowhere does the iniquity and wickedness of the world show itself so clearly as in this, the persecution of God's people. They see one who walks uprightly before God, one who is devoted to God and does no harm to his fellow man, but loves his fellow man. And what do they do with him? They imprison him. They torture him. They put him to death in the most cruel of ways. And God sees from heaven how the world treats his beloved children. And Jesus sees from heaven how the world treats his beloved bride. And when God's people ask in their anguish at times, how long, O Lord, shall this be? They are given the answer of Revelation 6, verse 11. And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed, as they were, should be fulfilled. Because God's people must fill up a different kind of measurement. The wicked fill up their cup of iniquity, so they're ready for judgment. God's people must fill up the measure of the sufferings of Christ. And that's Colossians 1, verse 24. Colossians 1, verse 24, Paul is speaking about his sufferings, and he says, who now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and fill up that which is behind of the affliction